Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, guys. My name is Liaquat Zaman. I think you guys know that by now. So today we're going to be covering Tafseer Studies Part 4. So we're going through Surah Naba, and some of you guys have requested this again. So here's the fourth part of the series. And the whole point of this is not to make you an expert in tafsir, but to give you an idea of how you navigate through tafsirs. So there's many people out there who know the Arabic language, but they just need a bit of navigation, support, help in how to look at tafsir books, how to read tafsir books. So here's what we are going to do today. So I've chosen, today we're going to be covering 8 tafsirs. Right? We're going to 8 tafsirs today, inshallah. The first tafsir we're going to be looking at is Surah Tafseer Tabari. It's the earliest one. Right, so Tafseer al-Tabari, we're looking at كلا سوف سيعلمون كلا سيعلمون. So he mentions here, he says يقول تعالى ذكره. All of this, basically all of that is the whole discussion on this part of the verse. كلا سيعلمون ثم كلا سيعلمون. It's two kind of verses. Right, so what does he mention? So he really only mentions three points. There's 3 major points that he discusses. If you kind of read through this, 3 major points. أمر يزعم حال المشركين الذين ينكرون البعث إياهم أحياء بعد مماتهم. Right, so he talks about what's intended by kalla, right, what's meant by it. It's a kind of like a threat to them. Okay, so الأمر كما يزعم حال المشركون توعدهم جل ثناؤه على هذا القول منهم ما الله فاعل بهم, what Allah will do to them. Wa'id, this is a threat by repeating it twice. So that's basically the main kind of points that he highlights over here. Right, so we can actually just put what he said, مؤمنون كذلك كان يقرأ. So we can put it in 3 points. Right, so let's just put that there. Okay, so ثم كلا سيعلمون المؤمنون, the believers will know. So some of the mufassirin have said كلا سيعلمون, no, they will soon know. Right, so some say it's the kuffar, some say it's the mu'minun, the believers. So if we were to write this out now, if I just say Imam Tabari, right, he say 3 points. First is what is intended by kalla, like what is meant by kalla. When Allah brings the word kalla, like what is he saying no to, like what was said earlier on that he's saying no to. So Imam Tabari talks about that. Number 2 is what's the object of saya'lamun, what will they know. Right, kalla saya'lamun, verily they will soon know. What is that thing that they will know? So he discusses that. And the third thing that he mentions is a reference. Right, so he references it by bringing a chain at the end, on the right hand side, and he says, Dahak says that saya'lamun is the kuffar, the first saya'lamun, and the second saya'lamun is the believers. Right, so this is Imam Tabari and how he deals with this verse. The next tafsir now is Tafseer Qurtubina. Right, so famous Spanish scholar Imam Qurtubi. So how does he deal with it? So he talks about even less. That's all basically. So it's like 5 lines there. Right, so that's all he discusses over here. You can kind of summarize what he says in 4 points really. Right, so I'm just highlighting some of the main sort of like things. So حقا لا يعلمن, in other words, what does كلا سيعلمون mean? حقا لا يعلمن. And then he brings the Dahak statement that Imam Tabari brings. Most likely he's just copy and pasting what Tabari says, and that's what later Mufassirin actually do a lot. And then he actually adds into this something else as well, another statement, right? And that statement is قيل العكس وقال الحسن. So it's like 3 opinion he brings here. One is Dahak's opinion. The first saya'lamun is the kafirun, the second saya'lamun is the believers. And then he says some say no, it's the opposite. The first saya'lamun is the believers, second saya'lamun is the kafirs. And the third opinion is Hassan Basri's, that this is a threat after a threat. Right, now he also mentions qira'at as well, which Imam Tabari doesn't really touch upon, which is the variations in recitation. So he says most of the people, they use saya'lamun with the ya, ya'lamun. But he says at the same time that some of the scholars like Hassan, Abu Aliya, Malik bin Dinar, they say ta'lamun, sata'lamun with the ta. Right, so there's two variations in the qira'ah that he points out. So we can actually just summarize this into 4 points, I say. So you can write this down as well. Imam Qurtubi, he says, first of all, that the kalla saya'lamun comes for emphasis. Right, so this is like emphatic. Haqqan la ya'lamunna, by bringing ta'keed, nun thaqila. So this is emphasis. Number 2, he talks about the object of saya'lamun, what will they know, like Imam Tabari did. And number 3, he references the statement. So he talks about the referencing, the Haq statement and the Hasan statement, right? So he's brought 2 statements there, and Tabari only brought 1. Well, he actually brings 3, but Tabari only brings 1. And the variations in the qira'at, right? So these are the 4 points now. That, you know, I mean, the question that comes to your mind would be that were this the only 4 points that came to the mind of Tabari, Qurtubi? And were these the only 3 points that came to the mind of Imam Tabari? Not really. Maybe he just wanted to highlight these points, and there's also other points out there, but he didn't design his book. He didn't have in his mind as an aims and objective that he was going to exhaustively mention all the points that he can. Right, so that's something you have to remember about tafseers as well. They're not really out there to kind of serve as encyclopedias of Quran, to mention every single thing that can come to their mind. Okay, the third tafsir we're going to look at is Ibn Kathir now. So Ibn Kathir, actually, he just mentions a very brief amount. You know, we can just summarize his points maybe in just like two things, really, two main sort of points. That's all. It's just like 1.5 lines, you can say, even less than that. Right, so Mutawa'id munkiri al-qiyamah, this is like a threat to those people who deny the day of judgment, and it's a threat, a severe threat after a threat. A lot of the tafseers I've read, they kind of copy each other. So it's very kind of like copying, pasting what others have said without quoting them, right? So this is something that you find in tafseers. So Ibn Kathir, he's just 2 points. One is the emphasis. He's showing that this verse has come for emphasis, ta'keed. And the other is the threat. That repetition serves as a threat, right? So he doesn't mention who is, like Qurtubi mentioned who, but he doesn't mention the who, right? Or Tabari mentions. Okay, so there's 2 points that Ibn Kathir mentions now, right? So that's why if you just suffice with Ibn Kathir, don't expect all the discussions of the ayah to be covered by just one mufassir, right? Sometimes you might not even need a mufassir on certain issues. Okay, the third tafsir is tafsir of Kashaf, Imam Zamakhshari. So he was a 500 scholar, right? So just after Imam Ghazali, for those of you guys who didn't know that. Kalla saya'lamun, thumma kalla saya'lamun. So that's all he mentions, 2.5 lines, you can say. That's all he has a discussion on this. So we can basically kind of like put his 2.5 lines into 5 points, right? So he says kalla comes for rada'. It's like a kind of, you know, what the meaning is, reprimanding. The second point, you know, he talks about those who were mocking, yeah. You know, that yatasa'alun was done, the questioning that they were asking one another was actually out of mocking, yeah, making fun. Third is that the haqq, the truth, yeah, in other words, something which is absolutely certain that's going to occur. He talks about the repetition as well, right? So the repetition serves as like severity, and then he starts a discussion on the thumma. Like, why has he brought thumma for? See, I found he is one of the earliest people to discuss this thumma. Like, why does Allah say kalla saya'lamun thumma? Why not say kalla saya'lamun wa kalla saya'lamun, or kalla saya'lamun fa kalla saya'lamun? He talks about thumma. Thumma in Arabic means then. So he says the word then serves as a kind of threat itself. By mentioning then, right, it's like in itself implicitly implying some sort of threat. Alright, so these are 5 points that we've got from Kashaf. You can put these down as well. So the first point is reprimanding. So he's saying that kalla comes for reprimanding someone, telling someone off, scolding someone. Number 2 is that it comes for mocking, right? So mockery, mocking. Number 3 is the truth, the haqq. Yeah, so he, the thing that basically that they were asking about and laughing, making jokes about is in reality the haqq. This is the true reality of things. And number 4 is repetition. So the repetition is a very important key feature in these 2 ayahs. And number 5 is the effect of thumma. Right, so the effect of thumma, that's another kind of important grammatical or even balagha sort of point that he points at. So when you read his tafsir, you have to remember what were the kind of pioneering things that he mentions in his tafsir, or what were the kind of unprecedented discussions that he discusses that we don't find in tafsirs around his time or before his time. That way we can gauge the quality of his tafsir. So this is Imam Zamakhshari's next tafsir we're going to look at is Ruh al-Ma'ani, Alusi. So Alusi, he actually has a very long discussion on this, and a very, very long. You can see all of this now, right? All that going down there. I'm not going to count how many lines that is, but you guys can get an idea, right? So we can summarize his points maybe into like 7 points, I think. I'm just going to mention 7 main points, probably more than that. So he starts off and he says, Qila, it is said that taqrir lima qablahu min al-rad'. It is said that this is to repeat that what was before as a reprimanding. Maybe he said Qila because he doesn't want to kind of mention Imam Zamakhshari's name, because Imam Zamakhshari is a Mu'tazili. Some people try to avoid kind of highlighting him. So maybe he doesn't want to mention his name, and he just says, some people have said that it comes for rada'. And Imam Zamakhshari, you have to give it to him, the guy does know what he's talking about when it comes to the Arabic language and grammar. So a lot of people do quote him. And it comes for wa'id al-mubalagha, which is for it's a hyperbole. Yeah. Okay, thumma littafawut. Okay, so thumma, he talks about the thumma discussion. So he says thumma comes for severity, in other words, tafawut, varying degrees, tafawut. كأنه قيل لهم يوم القيامة, it's as though it said to them, they have judgment, ردع وعذاب شديد بل لهم يومئذ أشد وأشد. That their punishment is going to be unimaginable. Like, they're going to think that their punishment is at this level when they see it, and they're going to be terrified, and all of a sudden they're going to be shown a punishment that's going to outshadow, that dwarf this punishment. And then all of a sudden they're going to see another punishment that's going to overshadow both of these punishments. And then all of a sudden they're going to see another punishment that's going to overshadow or dwarf any of these punishments. That's what it's trying to do. That's what it's saying. Yeah, so you can see he's kind of expressed it more. He's kind of like treating the audience as someone who is totally new and requires explanation of every small little detail. Whereas the previous tafseers kind of like treat you like someone who knows tafsir, knows Quran very well. And then they just highlight to you, certain things. So the previous ones treat you at a very high level of academia. Whereas Ruh al-Ma'ani, he'll treat you like a beginner in many cases. Okay, so he carries on and then he discusses thumma. Alright, so he actually a good point over here, he says Ibn Malik, he brings in. So Ibn Malik is a famous grammarian, and he says innahu min at-tawkid al-lafzi, that repetition of the word actually comes for the thumma rather comes for tawkid al-lafzi, the repetition, right? And then he kind of like discusses that a little bit. Tawkid lafzi wa inna tawassata harf al-ataf fala taghfal. And then he talks about, what is this referring to? He says, this is referring to, some people say that it's at the time of when the soul is going to be coming out, and some say no, it's the time when the angels come to a person, Malak al-Maut. And so they have different opinions about exactly what this point of saya'lamun, what exact point of time is that. So again, this is something other mufassirin haven't really kind of discussed, but he discusses it. So this is one of the things I like about Ruh al-Ma'ani. A lot of the times he'll kind of discuss things, even if they're very controversial, he'll discuss them, irrespective of whether some other mufassir has touched upon them or not. Okay, so he's got like kind of here, قيل الأول إشارة, ثاني إشارة إلى ما يكون يوم القيامة. The first كلا سيعلمون is in the world, second is on the day of judgment, right? And then he goes into he actually criticizes as well. So he discusses a point that was mentioned by some of the توهم بعضهم من كلام بعض الأجلة أن العطف على سيعلمون وأورد عليه. So they say some people think that the thumma is actually ataf on سيعلمون itself, and then he says there's actually problems with this, and he points out some of the criticisms. I'm not going to go through the criticisms, I'll just highlight it for you guys. You guys can have a read of these because some of them are a bit advanced, and I don't really want to spend too much time in discussing advanced things. A lot of people will just switch off. So this is another good thing about Ruh al-Ma'ani, where he discusses and he actually will give his own view on certain things and even criticize other people as well. All right, so it's a good tafsir if you want kind of engage, academically engage in discussions. It's a very good tafsir for this as well, and in many places he does this, so he doesn't really shy away from. Okay, and so he's discussing all of this over here, all these lines here. He's actually talking about this, and he's giving a response as well to why سيعلمون is not ataf onto the first سيعلمون, right? And he kind of continues. The final thing that he actually does, Ruh al-Ma'ani, the final thing that he actually does discuss is, or one of the things that he discusses is what does سيعلمون refer to, right? So سيعلمون, like we said, Tabari mentions referring to believers, disbelievers, and then believers, and then others say no, opposite, and others say no, it's referring to various times. So he discusses that, and then finally he touches upon the qira'at. Yeah, so he says some say ستعلمون, that both places that it has a ta, right? كلا ستعلمون ثم كلا ستعلمون. And then he talks about what the benefit of this is, that if it is ستعلمون, what balagha benefit comes out of this, which I think no one else really mentions. He does, which is a very good point. And the other one, he actually discusses some other views as well. So he says and Dahak, so he brings a Dahak one. Now where does he get this from? Most likely he's getting a lot of this from previous mufassirin as well, right? Okay, so like I said, we can put his points into about 7 points. 7 points. So one is the repetition. He discusses the importance of this repetition of the two ayahs. Talks about the hyperbole or hyperbole. Okay, and number 3 is the thumma. Right, so the discussion on thumma, and then he kind of goes into the reference of Imam Ibn Malik about this. He talks about referencing other people, not shy to do that. He also goes into the different applications of each part. Like we said, does it refer to the believers, the disbelievers, or both, or different times? He also discusses the criticism as well. Yeah, so criticism. So if a mufassir has said something and he's not happy with it, he'll say it, but he kind of doesn't mention their names all the time. Maybe that's a kind of he doesn't want to fall into criticizing someone and then having their name become discredited. So he avoids using their names. And then finally he discusses the qira'at, the different qira'at. Okay, just put that down there as well. So various qira'at recitations. So far we've covered 5 tafsirs now. Okay, these are 5 major tafsirs. Now going to the 6th one now. 6th one is tahrir wa tanwir. So tahrir wa tanwir, actually he discusses it in great depth as well. So here's one part of it, and then on the next page this is the second part. So it's actually, maybe you can say, maybe he goes into a bit more than Ruh al-Ma'ani. So what does he discuss? So I mean, his points, we can probably summarize his points into maybe 9 points. I'm going to summarize them into 9 points now. So he talks about kalla being harf rada', the nahwi sort of like grammatical positioning of this letter, status of this letter. And he actually defines what rada' comes for. إبطال الشيء يسبقه غالبا من الكلام يقتضي رد المنسوب إليه. So this is another thing that he does. It's like his audience, he actually treats them as even more beginners in certain things. Whereas Ruh al-Ma'ani, so you can say tafsir, tahrir, tanweer is like, if there's 10 steps of tafsir, Tabari will like discuss it at the level of step 7, 8, Qurtubi maybe 4, 5, Ibn Kathir maybe 6, 7, and Ruh al-Ma'ani maybe step 2, step 3. Tahrir wa Tanweer will actually start for the beginner, the person who's on absolutely the first step. Right, so that's another good thing about his tafsir. Okay, so he then kind of like just opens it up and he says this is actually responding and reprimanding those people who were mocking, who were criticizing about the Day of Judgment, etc. And I find this tafsir very, very useful, especially in highlighting points of balagha and how they apply it. And if you've watched my videos as well on tafsir of Surah Naba, the balagha of Surah Naba, the Quranic Eloquence series, then check that out, because a lot of stuff I find beneficial I get from Tahrir Tanweer, and it's very useful for the person who's kind of like becoming more familiar with the science of balagha. Okay, then he says والكلام إن كان إخبارا عنه فإنهم المقصودون به فرد موجه إليهم. معنى, what's meant by this, so he kind of like he explains it right in more detail, so lots of explanation he has over here. Okay, he also discusses the kalla, right? Okay, the next part. Alright, so he actually says the saya'lamun itself is actually two types of ilm, two types of knowledge. They will know, then they will know. So he's saying basically that there is two grades of knowledge, two levels of knowledge that they'll have, right? So he's saying one is the ilm of haqqi wuqu' al-ba'ath, and one is the ilm of the iqab alayhi. So one is that they will know that the Day of Judgment is coming, and they'll become resurrected, and the other one is the punishment that they're going to be suffering. They'll know of that. Okay, and then he says this is why the object has been omitted here. Yeah, so the object saya'lamun, it doesn't say saya'lamuna yawm al-qiyamah, so that you can kind of get a greater understanding of all the things that they will know, right? So it's like these people are not oblivious to one thing, they're making themselves oblivious to multiple things, and then because multiple, omit the object. Another thing is that he does tafsir of Quran with Quran, and this is one of the things we found that he is probably more common in doing than others. Yeah, so he says he brings narrations rather. First of all, in al-kafirina maq'aduhu, he says how will a kafir know this? So there's a narration where the kafir will see his place where he's going to end up when he's put in the grave, and a believer, his grave will be a garden of paradise for him. And then he brings another verses of the Quran, لَتَرَوُنَّ الْجَحِيمِ ثُمَّ لَتَرَوُنَّ عَيْنِ الْيَقِينِ. So tafsir of Quran with Quran. He also brings lots of balagha points. Yeah, so محاسن هذا الأسلوب في الوعيد فيه إيهام. So he brings up balagha points, right? So here I've just highlighted over here some balagha points that he has. And also he also has discussion on the thumma itself, what the thumma comes for. So he's kind of mentioned it in a bit of detail, and he's actually talked about the ataf. Okay. And he finally discusses pronouns as well, right? So right at the end, he discusses the pronouns. So that's another thing. So as you can see, there's about 9 points that I've kind of gathered from tafsir of Tahir ibn Ashur, Tahrir al-Tanweer. And so, you can have a look at that yourself. I'm not going to go into discussion of thumma, I've just skimmed through it. You guys can check that out. But that's what we have over here. So let's just write this down now. So Tahrir Tanweer. Now, I don't know if you guys can read Arabic or not, if you're familiar with Arabic. But if you are, then this is a tafsir I would highly recommend for you to start reading it. Read a little bit if you can. You might get a bit kind of confused with terminology and maybe some kind of expressions that he uses, but don't worry. So 9 points we're going to jot down here now, right? So number 1 is the usage of the discussion on repetition. Why does Allah repeat the verse? Everyone's talked about that really. He explains a lot. He goes into a lot of detail and explanation, which is a very good thing. He kind of talks about the context as well, right? So we saw that he talks about the context, and then he also answers this as well himself. Yeah, so context and answer, and the knowledge, the types of knowledge he discusses as well, like we saw. Yeah, so ilm, he says there's 2 types of ilm, right? That people are gonna become exposed to, which they didn't know. He brings in narrations as well to elaborate on his explanation. He brings other verses of the Quran as well. So tafsir of Quran with Quran, which is another common feature of tahreed wa tanweer, right? And it's a very good thing as well. And he also brings balagha points, which is one of the key features of this tafsir. Thumma discussion. So he has a long discussion on thumma, the ataf, the whole concept of the ataf, and how the 2 sentences are merged together or brought together. And finally he discusses the pronouns. So as he doesn't really kind of go into qira'at. Maybe it's so common that he just doesn't go into it. But that's basically it. Those are the main sort of points that we have. Tafsir al-Jalalain, right? This is all Tafsir al-Jalalain talks about. It's like 1.5 line, you can say. Right, so it's just 2 points really in Tafsir al-Jalalain that I've found. One is the emphasis point, right, and the second is the point about the thumma. That's all really, right? So he doesn't really mention about the repetition. He doesn't talk about the qira'at or anything like that. It's 2 points. So that's why I personally don't think that students should only read Jalalain. So Jalalain is a good tafsir to study if you want to familiarize yourself with the science of tafsir, but it's not the only one. Don't suffice yourself with this. So he talks about the emphasis, and he also talks about thumma, right? And I think if you want to read like a hashia with Jalalain, okay, hashia to Sawi or something else even, or maybe even read like Ruh al-Ma'ani with it, I think that would be very, very beneficial, rather than just reading Jalalain on its own. Because Jalalain just like, out of all the things that the Mufassirin have mentioned, Jalalain just picks on a few things. And here we can see that he's missed out a lot of things, and a lot of people would be unaware of them. Okay, finally, last tafsir now, Baydawi now. So Baydawi is actually much better than Jalalain here in discussing more like tafsir points that Mufassirin have discussed. So he says this is like a reprimanding. So one of the reprimanding he talks about the repetition. He talks about the thumma concept. He talks about application of each. What does saya'lamun mean? Who does it apply to? He talks about the qira'at, and he finally talks about a bit about grammar as well. Right, so there's a bit of grammar in there. So in those قُلْ لَهُمْ سَتَعْلَمُونَ, yeah, قُلْ لَهُمْ, if that is the case. So there's about 6 points here. So Baydawi, you can write this down as well. I hope this annotations are helping you guys. I don't know if it's beneficial. So reprimanding, he says that kalla comes for reprimanding. He mentions about the repetition. He talks about the thumma, which we've seen nearly everyone talk about. He talks application of each one. He talks about the different qira'at. There's 2 major qira'at of it, but he doesn't go into all the qira'at. And finally, the grammar aspect of it as well. Right, so this is basically something which I thought I'd just mention to you guys. Now, when I personally go into a tafsir, what I do is I think I'll make a video or maybe a few videos on how I approach a tafsir, or how I personally, when I'm gonna deliver a lesson on tafsir or Quran, a verse of the Quran, what kind of tafsirs I look at, how do I kind of gather information, and how do I present it. That's something I think is going to be useful for a lot of you guys. I'll do a separate video for that, because sometimes people have it in their mind that in order for a person to understand the Quran, you have to go to the tafsir, and the tafsir is the only place that you can actually get access to understanding the Quran, which is not really the case. Tafseer is just like a bank of like quotes that scholars have mentioned, but the reality is, to understand the tafsir, you need to have understanding of Arabic grammar, linguistics, classical poetry, expressions of Arabic, other verses of the Quran, hadith, etc., etc. You need to have a lot of understanding. And if you have these, understanding the Quran now, you're in a position where you qualify to be able to kind of have a good understanding of the Quran. The tafsir is used as a support. So you kind of refer to the tafsir just for some extra support in understanding this verse. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Jazakallah khair to my patrons. For you guys, you guys are the guys. It's been about 6 months now, and subhanallah, time flies by, and I've made, I don't know how many videos I've made since December or beginning of January. And Jazakallah khair for all your support, all the people that have supported me in this. If you guys want to support this channel and you guys want to become a patron, check out the link in the description. Think about becoming a patron. It'll help me a lot as well. And if you like my content, subscribe, give a likes, and share it with your friends and your family. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, guys, for watching this video. And again, thank you to all my patrons as well for all your support. Jazakumullah khair. May Allah reward you immensely. If you guys want to become a patron, then links in the description below. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.